The bottom of my chalice actually still says May 23rd, because that was the original ordination date, but we'll eventually have to get that changed. It's a blessing to be here with you, and I thought maybe based on our advertisement in the bulletin that we would start by just holding hands in our circles. No, I'm just kidding. We're not gonna do that. All right. Yeah, yeah. Just to give a brief like 3-step outline for the talk here. So I'm going to talk about the history of the companions of Christ. I'm going to talk about the life of the companions, and then I'm finally going to talk about the call to holiness. If you look at the last 100 years of priesthood, I think we can all say that there's been a huge change. You've seen it, you've experienced it, you still see it in the parishes. We were just talking at our table before I came up. The uniqueness of this parish to have 4 to 5 priests just kind of buzzing around all over the place, saying several masses and hearing hours of confession and hospital visits. It's a lot different now at St. Joe's. It's just the pastor and I. So I wasn't able to say Mass with you today because I had to protect the funeral slot for this day. So I had the morning Mass. If a funeral came in, I had to take it, and I couldn't have said this Mass. So it's just a little different routine. But if you think back 50, 60, 70 years, 4 or 5 priests in a parish was everywhere. On the other hand, you probably are well aware of the distinction or difference between diocesan priests and religious life, that being Franciscans, Jesuits, Dominicans, Benedictines, right? These priests and some lay brothers who spend time in prayer and living together and hold each other accountable. They don't move from location to location. Some of them, like the Benedictines, they vow stability. So come hell or high water, they're staying on the corner of Yackley and Maple, right? That's their monastery. That's where they go. They live there, they die there, they're buried there. That's their home, right? That's the life. Communities are both men and women. They follow a rule of life, holding them accountable to their life and their specific charism for which they feel called. And they're striving together towards that charism. And in the life of the community, the members of the order strive and hold the evangelical counsels: poverty, chastity, and obedience. The other side of the coin, diocesan priesthood. So the priests here at this parish, most parish priests, they're slowly moved from place to place. Certainly in our younger years, we're moved more frequently. But as pastors, you get 6-year terms, renewable twice. So you don't see us moving too often. But diocesan priesthood promises a life of chaste celibacy, obedience to the bishop, and a life of simplicity. So even in the wording, you can see there's a little difference. That's the instantiation in the diocesan priesthood of the evangelical councils. Yet they're not vowed, they're promises. And with human nature at play, the shortage of priests, the countless demands that are placed upon priests, the challenge of living intentional fraternity and being a cohesive unit is very challenging to uphold. Thus came about the history of the Companions of Christ here in Joliet. The Companions of Christ began in St. Paul, Minnesota, exactly 30 years ago this year, by 4 laymen. They were all on the road to priesthood, formally established the Companions of Christ. Over those 30 years, many priests have association. I think it's somewhere about 30 to 35% of the presbyterate up in St. Paul, Minneapolis, are Companions of Christ, several of whom have run the college seminary for decades. That's where our diocese still sends men to formation today. It was in the college seminary that I first experienced the beautiful way of life of the Companions. As a college seminarian, the only real interaction we had with the Companions was every month they would come to use our chapel, and we would know they were present because you could smell the incense wafting up the floors into our seminary. We also knew that there was this thing called Lord's Day, which the rector would invite men to participate in and experience the way of life. But even more fundamental, looking back on the experience, the entire way the seminary was run is based on the life of the Companions. We were put into small groups where we would routinely share our life and our hearts, help each other to process what we were experiencing, bounce ideas off each other, and pray and support one another. We were encouraged, if not forced, to have intentional meals and food together, whether it was cooking or going to the cafeteria or going to a restaurant. We would be forced to go to meals with our diocese and our other men on the floor. There were common chores, common times of studying and recreation, common penances and prayers that would be done with the guys that you lived with on your floor. Very naturally, we all thought, this is a nice way to run a seminary. And it was. But what we experienced was the life of the companions of Christ being implemented in the seminary. To say that I'm grateful for my formation that I received up in St. John Vianney College Seminary does not simply do it justice. And if you think about it, you've experienced the fruits of the seminary here very tangibly. Father Mike, Father Ryan, myself, Daniel Obendorf, our youth minister here, all graduated and were trained at St. John Vianney College Seminary. From there, 15 years later, the Archdiocese of Denver established the Companions of Christ in their diocese, and subsequently to this day, they run the seminary. The vice rector is a Companion of Christ. In 2016, Father Mike McMahon and Father Max Baina were discerning the Companions of Christ and spoke to Father Stephen Borello about such a desire. At the same time, Father James Garaccio and I were speaking of discerning the Companions of Christ with Father Stephen Borello. So he naturally put the four of us together and shared our desires with the four other people. I won't go into all the details because your eyes will continue to glaze over. There are a few key points of the Lord's providence that I think are very edifying to share. Beginning October 2016, all four of us now at this point at Mundelein Seminary began meeting to discern how to start the Companions of Christ. And only as the Lord would have it, one of the founding members of the Companions from Denver was studying that year at Mundelein Seminary. So the four of us began to meet regularly with Father Matt Book to begin living the life of the Companions, to understand the way of life, and to really get help along the initial steps in the process. After a few months of that, we finally approached Bishop Conlin to express our desire and intention to begin the Companions of Christ here. Side note, in canon law, you always have the right to establish yourself in a community, but certainly we wanted to do that with the bishop's blessing. So it was a two-step process here. He knew very well that that's our right. At the same time, we knew very well that that's our bishop. So the two have to speak. And being a canon lawyer, Bishop Conlin really wanted the I's dotted and the T's crossed. There was no way around that. And so that began this arduous and difficult process of working with all the people in the diocesan offices to make the Companions of Christ work here in our diocese. It was some 4 years, from the fall of 2016 to the spring of 2020. But finally, around February of 2020, we had everything ready. Bishop had approved everything at this point. His canon lawyer, our chancellor, everyone in the diocese had approved the process. And so in that time, Father Max and Father Mike had been ordained. Father James and I had been deacons at this point. And so there was just one hurdle left, and that was to sign the official declaration of erection of the Companions of Christ. And then Bishop Conlin had a medical leave of absence. So Pope Francis immediately appointed Bishop Richard Pates, our apostolic administrator. And again, the Lord's providence so very clearly at work. Bishop Pates had been a priest in the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, where he later became an auxiliary bishop, and from there went on to Iowa before coming to us as our administrator. So hearing that the Companions of Christ were so close to being established here in our diocese, and being intimately familiar with the Companions from his own priesthood experience, he called us in to establish us on March 23rd, 2020. You can guess that that was postponed. The pandemic had postponed the date that we were scheduled to meet with him to establish it, and subsequently we were able to ask for a very specific date. And so we picked May 1st, the feast of St. Joseph the Worker, but also the day, if you remember during the pandemic, where all the bishops in the United States consecrated our country to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So thus, we joined Bishop Pates on May 1st to establish the third rendition of the Companions of Christ in our diocese. On to the life, which is where the rubber hits the road. I'm sure some of you have been to an ordination, but certainly not all of you. And I think the promises of the priesthood are very striking. And so if you have never been to an ordination, I encourage you to go. It's even easier these days with virtual world. But I just want to read for you the promises that a priest makes in front of his bishop and also in front of the whole church. Do you resolve, with the help of the Holy Spirit, to discharge without fail the office of the priesthood in the presbyteral rank as worthy fellow workers with the order of bishops in caring for the Lord's flock? That's the first promise. The second, do you resolve to exercise the ministry of the word worthily and wisely, preaching the gospel and teaching the Catholic faith? Do you resolve to celebrate faithfully and reverently, in accord with the Church's tradition, the mystery of Christ, especially the sacrament of the Eucharist and the sacrament of reconciliation, for the glory of God and the sanctification of the Christian people? Do you resolve to implore with us God's mercy upon the people entrusted to your care by observing the command to pray without ceasing? Do you resolve to be united more closely every day to Christ the High Priest, who offered himself for us to the Father as a pure sacrifice, and with him to consecrate yourself to God for the salvation of all? So I'm supposed to promise those things in front of my bishop and the church and walk out and be assigned to a parish, right? That's what's supposed to happen. I'm supposed to promise these things and then go to a parish. I thank God that they provided us those promises months and years before we actually had to stand there and make them, because they're powerful. But at the same time, although many of you were not married at a cathedral, the promises are not all that different than those of you who are married have made. Have you come here to enter into marriage without coercion, freely and wholeheartedly? Are you prepared to follow the path of marriage, to love and honor each other for as long as you both shall live? Are you prepared to accept children lovingly from God and to bring them up according to the law of Christ and his church? And you're supposed to walk down the aisle with your wife and somehow live out these promises when you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Right? The two vocations are intrinsically different, but also virtually similar. So let's go into the concrete practicals of how we live as companions of Christ. And I think you'll see these mirror the same things you're naturally trying to do, or you're striving to do, or things that you can set as goals. Very practically, we are founded in prayer and rooted in prayer. So each morning, 6:15, we're in the chapel praying our holy hour. And that's, of course, in front of our Blessed Sacrament. It goes without saying, but we celebrate Mass daily. Some priests don't necessarily hold to this. It's not required of us to say Mass every day, but if I can change bread into Jesus, why the heck wouldn't I, We have support groups, so bi-weekly we share our hearts with each other. This offers us the opportunity to pray very intentionally for our brothers, but also allows us to love each other in our weaknesses. Right? So the foundation there is a support. Even in our weaknesses, we have brothers. We have common recreation, so we strive for time spent together, be that pickleball, hiking, you name it, we're out there. Meals were founded on breaking of bread, and so Lord's Day, which I mentioned earlier, is a Sunday evening or a Saturday evening or a Sunday midday meal, and this is open to any priests. So our door is open. We just ask for a little heads up so we have enough meat, but all the priests know that they can always get a meal and fraternity with us. And then we, just as companions, gather for a meal on Wednesdays throughout the week. Poverty. So again, this is the Companions of Christ strive to live out the evangelical counsels. And so diocesan priests promise a life of simplicity. So we want to take that one step further to be in line with the evangelical councils. And so poverty is where it really hits the road. And this is kind of the sticking point for a lot of priests, discerning whether they want to enter the community or not. So we don't accept stipends. So if a priest goes and celebrates sacraments at another parish, they have what's called a stole fee, so a stipend fee, things that you would pay for the priests. We give those entirely to the poor. We survive on our salary alone, which is fine. I'm not scraping for meals here, right? Like, I have everything I need. Everything is provided. We tithe the 10% that the church asks of us. So 5% goes directly back to our assignments, which got a little hectic for me with dividing up my time the past 2 years here between 75% here and 25 there, and then 50-50. And the other 5% goes back to our association to help us pay for our meals. We have to get permission. So in our support groups, we have to get permission if we're going to spend more than $200. And similarly, we have to get vacations approved by our fraternal group. And then annually on Ash Wednesday, we do a purge. And this is very painful, but the brothers go through your belongings and say what you need. And so if they deem that you don't need it, it's going, you know. There's an appeal process, but we don't do it, you know. It's not worth the time. Yeah, we have conferences twice a year, so priests are called to have a continuing education, so as to stay up with the theology and kind of what's happening around us. So we like to do those together, annual summer conference and then a winter villa. So actually in 2 weeks we're getting ready to go for our summer conference. It's a little late, but we're together with the Denver Companions going out to New York. We're walking the North American Martyrs Trail. So John Brebeuf, Isaac Jogues, Kateri Tekakwitha, these were all saints that were martyred in North America. And so there's a 60-mile trail that goes between all of these shrines. I think when you boil it all down, the life of the Companions of Christ strive to live the evangelical counsels so that we can live lives of holiness and fruitful ministry. Right? We live this way of life to be free to minister. Right? It's the same promise of your marriage, right? Do you come here freely? There's so many things that can hold us down from freedom. Do you come here freely? It's no different than every other priest. We're called to holiness in the same way. The only difference is I think I'm weak enough that I need a structure. I know I'm weak enough. I need help. I need a rule of life. I need guidelines to help me live this. So a call to holiness. It's not good for man to be alone. It's not. And this applies in the same way as it applies to a marital situation, but it also applies in a very different way to other vocations. When left to our own conscience, the enemy is really good at convincing us of what we're doing is right or morally upstanding. When left to our own conscience, first and primary rule of seminary, it's kind of said tongue-in-cheek, but it's don't be weird, and that goes out the window very quickly, right? When left to our own conscience, everything that we can do can be deemed accessible. Notice, however, that we're never called to holiness alone. Our Lord has given us the church, the sacraments, our vocations to work out our salvation here and now. We have, of course, the communion of saints, which spur us on to lives of heroic virtue. If there's one tidbit you take away from this talk, maybe it's the fact that in your vocation, it's how the Lord has deemed you to earn your salvation, to work out your salvation here. If it's marriage, if it's priesthood, if it's consecrated life, if it's single life, that's how our Lord has given us an avenue to have salvation readily accessible. Perhaps it's something you recall at 3 a.m. when your kids wake you up for the third or fourth time. Perhaps that's the prayer of your heart when you're processing a difficult conversation with your wife. The last point I'll make is just before we turn into questions and table discussions, look around you. You have men here who are trying to live virtue. You have men here who are trying to found a community and are trying to live this Catholic life. There are many offerings at this parish and all the parishes around. That man is you, the youth group, the young adult group. Adoration readily accessible. Sacraments, sacrament of confession offered many times a week here. And programs like this, Faithful Fathers, right? The list goes on. So get a group, schedule adoration. Maybe it's 2 or 3 or 4 guys, and you take an hour slot at the adoration chapel. Maybe you don't even take an hour slot. Maybe the 4 of you know when you're free that week, and you go pray together. Maybe it's a routine sharing with a trusted group of men of what you're doing, what you're experiencing, where the Lord is calling you, where you're falling, where you need help. We're not alone in this life. We're never alone in this life. Our Lord has given us brothers and sisters to help us toward heaven, to be our companions unto Christ. So I encourage you, be companions of Christ. So I'm going to open it up to questions before we go into table discussion. The floor is yours. Yeah. Yeah, very quickly. I'll share only my experience for the sake of the other brothers, but uh, what I experienced at Bennett these last couple years, these last 12 months really, I would not have been able to minister at Bennett in the same capacity I could if I didn't have the support of the brothers I lived with. So it very directly and concretely helped me in my ministry towards Bennett. And each guy can say the same thing, right? Of the beauty of our community supporting them in ministry or a struggle or a challenge. Um, and it's as simple as Father James knows I'm at Edwards and he got a call for an anointing, so I take that off his plate. And that saved him an hour, right? That's a simple, practical thing. Uh, but very concretely, it gets way more intense, right? So, I got screamed at by person X today because they thought I did Y, and I feel like a failure. Well, that hits a little harder. But to have brothers who say, no, that's not who I know you to be, and that's not who I know God who sees in you beauty, and so to call you out of that rut, we all get in them. Yeah, but very concretely, it's helped me in ministry already, and I assure I'm sure it will continue the years to come. Yeah, good question. Yeah, so it's a funny story. When Bishop Pates wanted to establish the companions, Father James and I were deacons at that point, so we had scheduled meetings with Bishop Pates. You have to have a one-on-one meeting with the bishop before you're ordained. It's in canon law. So we were having those in the middle of the pandemic, and uh, he said to Father James, we should start the companions. And then in my meeting immediately after Father James's, he said, you need a house. So we went from he's going to establish the companions to we're going to start living together like ASAP. So we started, Father James and I, that night, lined up 3 rentals to go check out the next day. And the first rental we went to, we fell in love with. And the other 2, I have very bad allergies. Though the second house we went to, I could smell the cats through my mask outside. So I'm like, this is not going to work. Thanks for the viewing, but we're not going to view it. So we ended up going back to the first house, showing Father James, Father Max, and then we called Father Michael Polowitz is a priest in our diocese. His mother is a realtor in Lisle, so we knew exactly who to call, and she helped us out. So we rented a house for the first year, May 2020 to May 2021, and then Father Max became the pastor at Margaret Mary July 1st of 2021. So we moved into the rectory there. So we've been living there now since May of 2021. And Father James is assigned in Aurora. I'm assigned to Downers. So we each go east and west, and then he goes across the street. So that's where we're living right now. Ideally, when we get more members, we'll have another house somewhere, and then it makes assignments and traveling and all that kind of stuff a lot more easier, a lot more easy. But right now, it's just the three of us. So three of us in the diocese. There are guys who are considering and candidates, but right now it's the three of us. Yeah, it's very attractive for just as it attracted the four of us. It's attractive because we see it in college seminary. We experience the life of the companions, whether we realize it or not. Yeah, that was back in college seminary. We would each floor would do a common penance. So uh, most floors would have meatless Fridays till 3 p.m. or silence on the floor till 3, or no technology on Wednesday, or different things like that. Yeah, just enough to sting. Yeah, peas, poverty, prayer, and purity. Those are our three like quick check-ins, and then we go into all the other like how's our life going. Yeah, so we have every other week we have those discussions. Totally. Especially not every week. I'm sure you guys have seen in the news that Downers Grove tried to do a drag show at the public library. I don't know how far this YouTube video is going, but it'll probably get flagged now. I preached a homily very directly, speaking to the beauty of marriage and kind of what the church, how the church views events like that, and et cetera, et cetera. And that homily went through several priests vetting it, couples, lay couple, those types of things. So definitely, definitely. And those two, like, so that weekend I came home Saturday after the first homily, and Father Max was there to ask me how it went. What do I need? Like, do I need to change anything? Do I need time? Like, he was there. And then Sunday night I was not on to cook because they knew I had given this huge homily, and so they loved me and supported me in that way. So yeah, the community knows what each other is going through. Yeah, yeah. There are four key positions. So Father Max is the moderator, so he's our head honcho. We like to call him the Lord Tyrant. Um, and Father James is the candidate supervisor, so he helps the guys coming along, and I'm the treasurer. We don't have a designated secretary, note taker, but we just make do in our meetings. But yeah, we have a formal structure. We have formal meetings and minutes and all those types of things, and we have a finance board that we report to, and the diocese can always look at our books and everything like that. So just as a parish would, but it's just a much smaller function, obviously. Yeah, so that's kind of where, uh, like religious life, they don't own anything themselves. It's all pooled into one kitty. We have, as diocesan priests, but also as companions, we have our own accounts and everything like that. Um, if a guy's struggling in that regard, I'm sure we would find a way to support them, and maybe make a budget or you know, we have to plan for our retirement like anybody else. So, are you setting aside money for retirement? Are you you planning to be destitute when you turn 70? Like those types of things. Yeah, there's no issue right now. So we haven't had to cross that bridge. We have to work with the vocations director on this when a seminarian is discerning with us. Um, Mostly it's the end of the last 3 years of formation where they can be formally a part of the companions. Uh, yep, exactly, exactly. I want to go back to your question though. It's been sitting in the back of my head with accountability partners. Um, One thing that we learned very quickly is if everyone's not on the same page with vulnerability, then someone's either going to leave upset or hurt, right? So you can be upset that the other guy is not as vulnerable, or you can be hurt that the other guy shared too much, right? So uh, that's one reason why we have our rule of life, right? We have something that we all mutually agree upon. We know we're going to meet every other week for faith sharing. We also know that if we're not sharing enough, another guy can probe, and that might hurt. But it's so that way we all share the same vulnerability, the same uh, really kind of unwalled heart, you know. So I guess that would be an experiential thing that we've witnessed. It's difficult and it's challenging to establish that level of trust, but once it's there, it makes all the difference. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I think there's yeah, I think there's 3 guys in the seminary that are serious about it. Uh, Priests is another question. We get some that come around in spurts, uh, some that will be at Sunday, Lord's Day often, and then kind of go off the map. Um, but we're not concerned about that because uh, we desire more members, right? We desire our community to be larger, to be flourishing in that way. Uh, but so long as we're following the Lord, so long as we're supporting one another, so long as we're being a leaven for the other priests in the diocese, like they can come get a meal and have that space for fraternity, then that's living our charism. So yeah, but I think there are three guys in seminary that are pretty serious about discerning companions. The most difficult thing, honestly, we because we all know that the other guys are coming, we hit ourselves. So um, I think there was I asked the other guy, I'm not going to say his name. I said, "What do you not want us to see?" You know, like we're invited into their room and we could go look at things, but I'm not going to go searching their drawers and under their bed. Like that's craziness. But I just asked him like, "What do you not want us to see?" And sure enough, he had like an answer right away. You know, and so we started questioning him like, "Do you need that? What do you use that for? How long has it been since you've used it? Can you survive without it?" Like those types of things are just they're gut checks right in front of the other guys at the house, you know. So it just yeah. The I think the ideal in all of those situations and all of those conversations is to make the guy realize he doesn't need it himself because that's freedom, right? It's not free if I say you're throwing that. That's not his freedom, and I'm not helping him in that process. But if we can help him see that he doesn't need that, that's a whole different ballgame. All right, so you have some questions there.